Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. Dan Proft, morning drive talk show host, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. Me and Amy Jacobson, 5 to 9 each weekday morning. And joining me this week is Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, one of the big stories this week, AFSCME, the state's largest state worker union, representing some 37,000 state workers, took a strike authorization vote and got 80% of their members, those that participated, to authorize a strike. Now, that doesn't guarantee that there will be a strike, but it takes this impasse between the governor and the largest state workers union to the next level. And at least I would think have to start game planning for the possibility of, the possibility of a strike and what the governor should do if that should come to pass. What should he do?
I think he started it. He put a website up that asked for people to, apply in the event of a strike to fill those slots. This is his potential air traffic controllers moment. You and I have talked about this on air before. So that's what he should do. I think there are plenty of people who are out of work in the state who would welcome an opportunity to work for the state if the AFSCME people go on strike. I say he calls their bluff.
For more on where the impasse stands with the escalation, we're pleased to be joined by Miley Smith. She is a labor attorney with the Illinois Policy Institute. Miley, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we've talked to you before. You kind of walking us through this this winding path to this moment where AFSCME has authorized a strike through the vote of their members. So what are the governor's options and what are AFSCME's options? How could this play out? Give us some of the hypothetical scenarios.
Sure. Well, the governor, under state law, is free to replace striking workers. So this jobs website that he has set up, that's a good first step. It makes it easy for people to seek temporary positions. Those could potentially become permanent positions, just depending on how the strike goes and what kind of strike it is. And so he's doing what he can at this point, and I understand that he has talked to vendors and other resources to get things lined up to keep state operations moving and running smoothly. As far as AFSCME workers are concerned, their options, especially if their members are fairly limited, if the AFSCME leadership calls a strike. AFSCME can punish workers who, their members anyway, who do not honor a picket. So, they have a choice to make. They can if AFSCME calls a strike, they can go to work and continue getting their paycheck and preserve their position, or they can go on strike.
So, Miley, it's Pat. These workers, the rank and file, who are never as responsible for these things as their feckless leadership, they have the option, right? There's no Constitution allows that they can move themselves from the union and become non-union state workers. They'd have to pay fair share dues, which of course we're arguing at the Liberty Justice Center are unconstitutional. But isn't that an option for them? And should we be encouraging them to take that option? They'd hold on to their jobs. They disassociate themselves from union bosses who are taking them down a bad path, and all they'd have to then do is pay the fair share dues.
Exactly. So an AFSCME member can broaden his or her options by becoming a fair share payer. And you're exactly right. What that means is that that worker is not a union member. That means they are not under the authority of the union. They can cross that picket line and go to work without fear of punishment from AFSCME. And they get everything that is promised under the contract. So they get all of the benefits that are promised under the contract, and they get to go to work. And they get to keep their jobs and not fear either losing their paycheck for that month or fear, going in and risking union punishment.
Roberta Lynch, who's the head of AFSCME, has made the argument that this strike authorization vote is just an illustration of the desire by by the rank and file to get back to the negotiating table. Let's get back to the negotiating table. That's what we always hear from the union because they want to sound reasonable. Of course, they don't tell you, and very few report it, Kristen McQuarrie at the Tribune being an exception, that, they've had some 60-odd meetings over the course of this impasse where there have been some 200-odd proposals that have been pushed back and forth. And Roberta Lynch brings a whole phalanx of AFSCME rank and file workers to these sit-downs with the governor and his people to make it like a pep rally type atmosphere for, like a Workers of the World Unite kind of thing. Part of the story, it seems to me, that needs to be explained to the Illinois electorate is just how disingenuous AFSCME is when it comes to their pat response of let's get back to the negotiating table.
Right. And the first thing I would point out is that the Illinois Labor Relations Board did decide that the parties, AFSCME and the state, are at impasse. That means they're at a stalemate. That means the Labor Board thinks that any kind of future negotiations would be futile. Like, there's no purpose in going back to the table. AFSCME has stalled. They continue to require or demand just these extravagant benefits. And even the administrative law judge with the Labor Board, she actually said the union's conduct calls into question its commitment to reaching an agreement through bargaining. So we know that their conduct throughout negotiations was not genuine. They were not genuinely seeking compromise. And in fact, they offered a fake compromise earlier this year in January. And it was exactly that. It was fake. It was a publicity ploy. They were not giving in. They were continuing in their demands. And really what they were just saying again is, let's go back to the negotiating table. But we see that they are not serious at the negotiating table. And the governor, according to the Labor Board, should be able to implement his last offer.
So, Miley, the governor is has put himself in a good position, I think, with respect to this, because he's put up the job posting site. He's reached the impasse. I think, and I'd like your comment on this, that what he should do is go constantly public with two things. Number one, that if you're a member of the union, you should opt out and do the fair share play, and you can keep your job. That's number one. And he should bang that drum as much as he possibly can and put the rank and file against the leadership. And then secondarily, he should tout to the public that he has successfully negotiated contracts with, what is it, Dan? Another 20 public sector unions, right, including the Teamsters. And so that clearly shows you split the rank and file off and then show that it's AFSCME is the problem and not the governor.
He has talked about those 20 other unions, and that is something that I've seen reverberate through Illinois in other publications. And something that they talk about is that those 20 unions have accepted, not only have they ratified contracts, but those contracts include provisions that are similar to what he is asking of AFSCME.
Like a wage freeze.
So, like the wage freeze, like a 40-hour work week. And in terms of talking and trying to split the workers away from AFSCME, that's actually some pretty sketchy territory, just because in the context of labor law and labor relations, the laws really place restrictions on the employer's rights to communicate with the employees. But that's one reason why we continue to beat that drum and say, look, you can become a fair share payer. And we continue to drive that wedge and demonstrate that, you know what, AFSCME is asking for, these are extravagant benefits. These are nothing like what we see in the private sector. And so to continue to make that distinguishment between what AFSCME is asking and what the taxpayers can pay, and it really should not only create that division between AFSCME leadership and their people, because I would argue AFSCME leadership really does not have the best interests of their members in mind, but it also should isolate the public from AFSCME with, they're just incredibly extravagant demands.
What do you think the time horizon is for this to fall in one direction or the other? Either we're going to ink some kind of deal, ostensibly AFSCME agreeing to a contract similar in substance to the other 20 collective bargaining agreements the governor has successfully negotiated, or we see a strike and the governor takes whatever action he decides to take.
Well, I definitely think AFSCME is going to stretch this out. They're going to try to stretch this out as long as possible. In fact, there's even been chatter and suggestion that maybe they're just trying to outlive this governor and hope that they're hoping that someone else comes in a couple years. And they're kind of on that track, because where we're at right now, the labor board's decision has been appealed, and that is sitting before the 4th District Court of Appeals in Illinois. They haven't even decided anything. They're not even on the merits of the case. They're still kind of in the procedural stages. And so AFSCME has said that they will not, if you can take this at face value, they don't plan to strike unless the courts allow the labor board's decision to move forward, and then that would allow the governor to implement his contract. Whether you can take that at face value, it's AFSCME, so who knows. But with this being in court and the way the court systems can go, this could be weeks, it could be months before we see any kind of resolution in the court case alone. So we're looking at it at a long-term, continued, dragged out situation with AFSCME.
She is Miley Smith, labor attorney with the Illinois Policy Institute, illinoispolicy.org. Miley, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.